Woburn, Massachusetts, winter, 1839. The stove in the corner of a failing rubber factory is burning hot, and a thin man leans over it with his fingers stained black to the knuckle. He is not a chemist, but a bankrupt hardware merchant. His name is Charles Goodyear, and he has been ruined 4 times and jailed for debt. Yet here he is, still mixing. In his hand is a lump of gum elastic kneaded with sulfur, and every batch before this one melted in summer and cracked in winter. He brings it near the heat. It does not melt. Instead, it chars, like leather, and holds its shape. That moment is in every textbook. But it is not quite what happened, and we know that because he wrote it down himself. So how does this man die owing nearly $200,000? And how does his name end up on 1 billion tires sold by a company founded 38 years after he was buried? This is New American Fortunes, where almost none of them ended the way they began. Subscribe, because the stove is the least strange thing in this story. It begins in a hardware store in Connecticut. Charles Goodyear was born in New Haven in 1800, the son of a hardware manufacturer, and he grew up around iron. Buttons, buckles, hay forks, and the first steel pitchfork made in America. The family moved the business to Philadelphia, but by 1830 it had collapsed, and Goodyear went to debtor's prison for the first time. He was 29. Over the next 30 years, he would go back so often that a prison cell became something close to a second workshop. The story goes that in 1834, he walked into a shop in New York and bought a rubber life preserver. He thought he could improve the valve. But when he brought his design to the Roxbury, India Rubber Company, he was told not to bother. The valve was not the problem. The rubber was. America had just lost its mind over rubber. Investors poured in millions, and factories opened across New England making shoes, coats, mailbags, and wagon covers. Then summer came. The goods melted into paste on the shelves, and in winter they froze hard and shattered. Within 2 years, the entire industry was worthless, and the money was gone. Every trained chemist in the country had tried to fix it and failed. So who solved it? A bankrupt hardware salesman with no scientific training whatsoever. For 5 years, he mixed rubber with anything he could get hold of. Magnesia, quicklime, nitric acid. He boiled it, baked it, and once nearly killed himself on the fumes. Yet nothing held. His family followed him from town to town, living on charity from local farmers. 12 children were born to them, and 6 survived. His wife Clarissa had tuberculosis, and most of what little came in went on treatments and on travel to look for a cure. The neighbors thought he was mad, but he would not stop until the compound held. And then, in Woburn, came the sulfur and the stove. Here we have to slow down, because this is the most famous accident in the history of American invention, and it may not have been an accident at all. The version everybody knows is that he dropped the compound onto the stove by mistake. But historians who have worked through the patent fights argue that the accident was a very useful story. A discovery that arrives like a lightning bolt is easy to claim and extremely hard to contest. So go to the source. Goodyear published his own account in 1853, and his wording is oddly precise. He writes that the inventor made experiments to ascertain the effect of heat. Made experiments. That is a program of work, not a mishap. Then, in the same passage, he writes that the specimen was carelessly brought into contact with a hot stove. Both things are true at the same time. He was running deliberate trials on heat, and one contact inside those trials was careless. The accident is real. But it happened to a man who had been hunting it for 5 years. It took 4 more years to make the process reliable, and in June 1844, he was granted United States Patent number 3633. And that should be the end of it. But it is not. 8 weeks before Goodyear filed in America, an Englishman named Thomas Hancock filed in Britain for the same process. Hancock said he had been shown samples of American rubber treated with sulfur in 1842, and that he had worked backwards from them. Goodyear said that was theft. Historians still split on it. Some think Hancock reverse-engineered the material, while others think the chemistry of the 1840s could not possibly have supported it. What is not in dispute is the outcome. Despite traveling to Britain to fight the case in person, Goodyear lost. Hancock kept the British patent, and Goodyear kept the American one, and spent the rest of his life defending it. In March 1852, in a courtroom in Trenton, New Jersey, he brought in the most famous lawyer alive. Daniel Webster stepped away from the office of Secretary of State to argue it, spoke for 2 days, and won Goodyear a permanent injunction. Webster's fee was $15,000, the largest sum ever paid to an American lawyer to that date. But it was also more than Charles Goodyear ever earned from the invention itself. He won the case, so why was he poorer afterwards than he had been before it? Because he did not particularly want money. He wanted rubber in everything, everywhere, and instead of banking the victory, he spent it. At the London exhibition of 1851, he built a room made entirely of rubber. Rubber walls, rubber furniture, rubber floor. He did it again in Paris in 1855, on a scale he could not remotely afford. Clarissa had died in England 2 years earlier, worn out by 3 decades of it. And in France, the debts finally caught him. He was arrested and put in prison, and while he was there, the Emperor Napoleon III awarded him the Cross of the Legion of Honor. Now, this is where the record goes soft, so here is precisely what we can and cannot say. That he was imprisoned for debt in France in 1855 is firm, and that he was decorated in that same year is firm. Whether the medal was handed to him inside the cell or reached him only after his release, the sources will not agree. It is repeated almost everywhere as the cell, but we could not find a source that actually proves it. So we will say only what holds. France gave this man its highest honor in the same year that France locked him up for owing money. He came home to America still in debt, but still working. On the 1st of July, 1860, traveling to see a daughter who was dying, he stopped in New York and died there himself. He was 59, and his estate owed close to $200,000. Money from the patents did eventually reach his widow and his children, but it reached them years after he was already in the ground. And that is the whole of Charles Goodyear, a name, a process, and a debt. The tire company had nothing whatsoever to do with any of it. Akron, Ohio, the 29th of August, 1898. 38 years after the funeral. A local man named Frank Seiberling bought a strip of land and an old factory building beside a canal. He did not have the money for it, so he borrowed $3,500 from his brother-in-law to cover the down payment. Then he needed a name. Instead of using his own, he chose one belonging to a man he had never met, who had died before Seiberling had finished school. Why Goodyear? Because by 1898, the word simply meant rubber. It carried invention and struggle with it, and it cost absolutely nothing to use. There was no license, no agreement, and no payment. The name was free to take, and Seiberling took it. The company put a winged foot on the sidewall and started out making tires for bicycles. Then the automobile arrived, and Goodyear grew faster than almost anything else in American industry. By 1916, it was the largest tire company in the world. And here the story does something you would not dare to write if you were making it up. In 1921, after a hard expansion ran straight into a sharp recession, Goodyear had to be refinanced and reorganized. Frank Seiberling and his brother resigned. The man who had founded the company and named it was out of it. He was in his 60s, so he started a second tire company and put his own name on that one instead. Read the two of them together. The man the company is named after died owing $200,000, and the man who actually built the company was pushed out of it. Neither of them kept the thing that carried their name. Which brings us to the strangest object Goodyear ever built, and it was not a tire. In 1923, the company formed a joint venture with the German airship firm Zeppelin because the United States Navy wanted airships. Not for passengers, for war. But why would a tire company build warships that float? Because Goodyear had spent 20 years making enormous rubberized fabric envelopes, and nobody in America was better at it. Goodyear Zeppelin built 2 of them in Akron, the Akron and the Macon, and each was 785 feet long. Inside each one was a hangar. They carried fighter planes in their bellies and launched and recovered them in mid-air on a trapeze. They were flying aircraft carriers, and they are still the only ones anybody has ever operated. But they did not last. Just after midnight on the 4th of April, 1933, the Akron flew into a storm off the New Jersey coast, and a downdraft drove her tail into the sea. 73 of the 76 men aboard died. Most of them did not die in the crash, but in the water. The Navy had not put life jackets on board. Among the dead was Rear Admiral William Moffett, the head of naval aviation, and the man who had argued hardest for the airships in the first place. It is still the deadliest airship crash in history. 22 months later, the Macon went into the Pacific off Point Sur, California, and 2 more men died. That was the end of it, and the Navy never built another. So what actually survived all of this? Not Charles Goodyear, who died in debt without ever making a tire. Not Frank Seiberling, who lost the company he founded and named. Not the airships, which are on the sea floor. The name survived. It is on a blimp that drifts over stadiums on television, and it is on the sidewall of the tires underneath your car right now. And it belongs to a Connecticut hardware salesman who never earned $1 from it, never saw an automobile, and had been dead for 38 years before anybody thought to use it. He spent his whole life trying to build the world out of rubber. He got the world. But he never once got paid for it.